Hello lovelies, today we're taking a look at Blister Critters, which you may remember from appearing on T-Shirt's show. We talked to the people who were making it, and because I'm a sucker with all the restraint when it comes to shiny things of a magpie on meth, I backed it. I've been investigating the small animal genre a bit lately, spoilers, none of them have particularly set my heart aflame. And Blister Critters is not really any different, but it is maybe better in some ways than the others. So this is the boxed set, usual sort of box size and everything, sort of harking back to the 80s boxed games. It's by Odd Gob Games, who have done other things apparently that I've never heard of, but they're there. So this is the box that comes with all the little extras and so on. It's nice and colourful and stark. I like the graphic design. It's nice to see more and more games moving away from that kind of pastel mush aesthetic, which I really don't like. Word to the wise, there were two little circular plastic stickers on the side that held the lid on, and they are super annoying and super difficult to peel off, so I strongly suggest just cutting through them with a nice sharp blade carefully. So inside the box you get a bunch of stuff. So you get a bunch of stickers, or at least I did from the way I backed it. You get a main rulebook. You get a little poster thing of human detritus and tables of human detritus for relatively easy reference. You get an ad-libs sheet for making up sort of adverts, I guess. You get a bunch of cards. Well, clearly they're intending to expand on that a bit, but this is meant for reference of creatures and things during play. And we've got some dice and these kind of 1950s candy sort of colours. They don't show that well on the camera for some reason, but yeah, 1950s faded candy colours is the way I would describe them. So a less intense dye, like old-fashioned candies. There's a lot of empty space in the box, as you can see from the spaces here, and the only thing that is at full scale for the box is the main rulebook. Now, personally, I would probably have half-sized the core rulebook and made it thicker and made it hardback and put it the whole lot in a smaller box, but that's me. Other people make different choices, and it may have been down to production cost and all kinds of things that I don't know about, but yeah, that's what I would have preferred, I think. So the Ad-Libs notebook, I'm not sure how useful it is. It's a novelty. It's meant to be played as a sort of sub-game to get you into the wacky mood to play Blister Critters. The book itself is a fairly flimsy, flippy softback, full letter size. I think I would have preferred smaller hardback and overall smaller box, but yeah. I don't want to be a dick about things, because there is a lot that I like about this. You could call it miniature Gamma World, and you wouldn't be too far off, but I'm kind of resigned to things like content warnings and safety tools and so on now, because I just see it as the genuflection to the religion of the time, but it still makes my heart sink every time I see something like that because it's so unnecessary. And Jesus Cristo, not only do we have a content warning, but a land acknowledgement. I mean, how far back are we going on these things, really? Humans, except maybe if some people just stayed in Ethiopia since our species emerged, everyone has taken over land from somebody else at some point. It's just so empty and pointless, and kind of soured my mood for the whole thing. So maybe the lesson is to put your excuses and so on in the back rather than the front. I don't know, because it did kind of sour me on the whole thing. Alright, so the game itself, blister critters, because you're a critter and you have blisters. Blisters are what give you your mutant powers, because there's a radioactive sun, all the humans have died off, you remain, mostly living in burrows, but you develop these blisters the more time you spend adventuring and doing stuff outside, and they give you your powers until you abruptly and suddenly degenerate into a creature, I guess, a beast, a radioactive danger to yourself and others, at which point you lose your character. So there's a sort of inevitable doom to the whole thing, which maybe goes a bit against the Saturday morning cartoon aesthetic they say they're going for, but doesn't really come across in the text. So it's a post-apocalyptic world, a radioactive sun, humans died out or vanished, or at least seemed to have about 20 years ago, and mutant animals have replaced them. Critters, small animals that you can play, small versions of larger animals, tend to be the intelligent ones, while larger creatures, beasts, that's the word I was searching for, beasts, are much more mutated, less intelligent. You know, it's a whole thing. They describe different ways of playing. So you've got zany, which is a bit more cartoony, and gnarly, which is a bit more realistic's the wrong term, but gnarly, I guess, works as much as anything else. Grittier, perhaps. There's no particular rules for it, as you would find in more story-oriented games, like tokens or something to affect the game world, but it does invite player investment and involvement. Not a direct takeover, as you find in those other games, but player involvement in naming things, drawing places and maps, and being involved somewhat in the Games Master's more creative duties. For a starting character, your stats are determined by dice size. You've got D6 through D10 for starting characters. There's a little bit of confusion in the text about how this works. When they're talking about uncontested checks on your stats, the text says 6+ succeeds, while the table says 5+ succeeds. I'm not sure which is really talking about which. Personally, I would tend towards the 5+, given that the minimal dice type is a 6, but that gives you a bit more latitude if you want to switch things up a bit. On contested checks, you both roll dice and you compare the results. Stats for your critter include scrap, scurry, noggin, instinct, and vibe. It has an advantage-disadvantage mechanic, which I think is mandated by the Secret Masters of Games, SMOG, these days, but it allows you to stack a multiple advantage and multiple disadvantage. So you roll a whole bunch of dice and you take the highest or the lowest, depending. Rolling a 1 is a total failure, so that's going to happen fairly often. So it's a total failure, but not a critical failure per se. Secondary stats include health, how much damage you can take, how many frying pans to the face you can take, and grit, which is a pool of energy and effort that is used to power your mutant powers, to reroll dice, confirm critical hits, get bonuses to rolls, all of that sort of thing. There are some peculiarities to the combat system, like using a bow or a slingshot or whatever only does the damage of the projectile. Damage is delightfully called bonk in this. While throwing it yourself does more damage. Bonk plus your scrap score, reflecting your strength. Which doesn't really seem to take into account part of the reason that we use things like bows, slingshots, etc., which is that they're more efficient, more accurate, and can often project things with more power than we can do purely with muscle. Right, that's why these things exist. That's fixable. Maybe you could hurl bigger objects using your scrap score, which would make more sense. But it's still a little bit odd. Not fully thought through, I don't think. But then in a game about cartoon mutant animals, who cares? Besides statistics, characters are defined by category. For example, fuzzy creatures, leathery creatures, that sort of thing. Your path, which is your class, and your role, which is kind of almost a subclass. So that determines what type of creature you are, what type of role you play in the group, a bit more than class in the strict sense, and which suite of mutant powers you at least start with. So as mutated creatures, you get mutant powers, of course, such as extra or bigger teeth, tentacles, the ability to swell up into a, relatively speaking, kaiju-sized creature, and so on. The world isn't hugely well described, and it's kind of hard to figure out what exactly you're supposed to do in the game, and the ideas and the little mini adventure aren't hugely helpful there either, necessarily. It is slightly better in terms of world building and what you're supposed to do than Mouse Ritter, but nowhere near on the scale of world building and so on that you get in, say, Mouse Guard, for example. So somewhere between the two. If you just like kind of wacky, zany little creatures fighting things, then it's probably fine. You can make the effort and make up your own stuff, but I found it a little bit lacking on that front. So, I mean, there's a game here, there is a system here, the background is a bit lacking. I like the presentation, the way it's laid out, the style of the art, the graphical presentation, all of that I quite like, but it doesn't feel very complete, and I'm not quite sure what to do with it. Now, in my experience, games that do that, often the people who have created the game have a very strong idea of what's supposed to happen in the game. So strong that they overlook that they really need to kind of spell that out to people and give them the elevator pitch within the game. You know, what is this game about? Orson Scott Card is a homophobic dick, but he did write some useful advice on writing, which is, you know, within the first paragraph you should know what kind of story it is. And this doesn't really do that necessarily. But then we had them on the show, and they're clearly enthusiastic, and they've done a lot of things right. So, you know, I want to be encouraging. I don't want to be a complete bummer, but at the same time, I guess small critter adventures just aren't for me. After all this effort and money that has been spent on them, just, I don't know, none of them really tickle my pickle the right way. If I have to give this scores, style-wise, I'm going to give it a high 4, because it is just, again, I want to encourage the freshness, the more dynamic and different graphical styles that some newer games are starting to go back to. And I do really like the presentation. The writing lets it down a little bit, not in terms of competence or style necessarily, just that it's not conveying enough useful information for me to pick this up and play it and make something of it. So style then, 4. In terms of substance, there is some information on the world, and there is the sample adventure, but I still think sample adventures are a bit of a waste of time. I would have gotten rid of that and put more world information and maybe adventure seeds in. There just isn't enough there for me, so I feel that it does actually lack in terms of substance, so I would give it a 2 for substance. That gives it an overall score of 6 out of 10, 3 out of 5. Bang on average. If you like little creature games and you want to move from little creature fantasy games to little creature post-apocalyptic gamma worldy type adventures, or even you could set a Blister Critters game within the gamma world but beneath everyone's feet, you could do something like that with it, then it's still going to be worthwhile to you. It is a lovely, well-produced, pretty thing, but there's just not enough there for me, and unless I make it a Sunday game, I don't think it's something that I would ever play, which is really unfortunate, because I like the guys, and I hope they continue to produce games and get better as time goes on. Zang.
The Atomic Age, with its A-bombs, transistorized radios, jet engines, and a new breed of dangerous supervillain, requires heroes to face the challenge. That's where you come in. The world needs you, Agent of Swing.